Defending Israel with David Harris on JBS is made possible in part by a generous gift in memory of Eric and Mira J. Spector, the Paul and Lynn Late Family Foundation, To Life, to Love, Barbara and Bob Goodkind, the Patricia Worthen Ullman Foundation.
Hello JBS viewers, I'm David Harris and this is Defending Israel. And this week I'm very pleased to introduce you to another very special guest, Shabbos Kestenbaum, an American Jewish activist, a recent graduate of Harvard University, and very much in the news, and you'll see why in the next 30 minutes. Welcome, Shabbos.
Thank you, good to be here.
Did you set out in life to become an American Jewish activist?
No, to put it mildly. That's a term I'm still uncomfortable with. I came to Harvard because I was really interested in studying kind of two things. One was the intersection between public policy and American Jewish life, and the other was more niche, was theology after the Holocaust. Even now, I'm just a student. I'm very good at writing research papers and studying in the library. I'm not particularly good at giving speeches and congressional testimony. That's just not who I am. But as the ethics of our Father says, "B'makom she'ein nashim hishtadel lios ish," when there is a place where there are no men, strive to be a man. And I'm certainly striving, but I felt that in the situation I was in at Harvard, there weren't as many people speaking out for the truth. And so I just started speaking, and thank God people listened.
So your first 3 years at Harvard, one might say, were normal years, quiet years?
Pretty typical. I actually wrote an article entitled Antisemitism at Harvard in October of 2022.
Okay, so a year
before. So there were instances of anti-Semitism, but it was sort of this genteel anti-Semitism that you could really sweep under the rug, and that was not creating national headlines. But I was certainly aware of it, especially as someone who's in the religion department, and I would say that's sort of ground zero of this anti-Israel, anti-Semitic rhetoric and activities. But certainly nothing as prominent as what you saw on the night of October 7th and afterwards.
Okay, so October 7th happened, and if I recall correctly, by October 8th, 34 student groups at Harvard had already determined that Israel and Israel alone was guilty for what happened on October 7th.
Yeah.
Did that surprise you?
You know, in the words of Jonathan Greenblatt, the head of the ADL, shocked but not surprised. Okay. You know, it's certainly shocking to see that you have 34 student groups representing more than 1,000 students. On the night of October 7th, they begin circulating and drafting this letter. They publish it the morning of October 8th, but they're watching the images of kidnapped babies, of women bleeding from their private areas. They're watching those videos live, and the immediate reaction is to start drafting this letter. So it's shocking, it's inexcusable, it's deeply dangerous, but at the same time, I would say it's simply a natural outcome of years of, I don't like using the term, but years of political indoctrination. As someone who is in those classrooms, who learned from those professors that there is no greater outpost of Western imperialism than the State of Israel, it's not a surprise when you see students start acting out these ideas. And as my classmates will tell you, whether it was 4 babies, 40 babies, or 40,000 babies beheaded on October 7th, resistance is justified when people are occupied.
So your life also changed then. This was your senior year at Harvard, and you suddenly emerged. Big social media following, testimony before Congress, filing a lawsuit against Harvard, and appearing, though you describe yourself as a registered Democrat, as one of the speakers at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
That's quite a year.
Quite a year.
And I'm sure I'm missing a lot.
You're good. Well, first of all, let me say, if the Democratic Convention wants me to speak, I'd be happy to do it. As you said, I'm a registered Democrat. I've only voted for Democrats in the past. I try to be as bipartisan as possible while also recognizing that, yes, there are deep systemic issues in the Democratic Party. At the same time, I'm aware that there are these liberal allies. My congressman and my friend Richie Torres is simply incredible, and I hope he runs for president. But yeah, it's been quite a year. I remember the first time I posted on Twitter. I really, even now, don't know how to navigate and use social media that well, but the first time I posted relating to anti-Semitism at Harvard, I actually had a roommate help me out because I didn't know really how to capitalize on hashtags, how to create or amplify the message. And even now, I like to think what I'm doing is working. I've been very blessed to have more of a following on social media, but I'm just one person trying to do what I can. And I've been very privileged to speak in front of the Judiciary Committee, the Education Committee. I've had private meetings with chairmen of committees in Congress, and I'm just incredibly grateful.
Well, let's break down this last 10 months or so. Let's begin with the appearance of Claudine Gay on December 7th, and then her subsequent resignation, whether because of her testimony or because of the plagiarism charges or both, you'll know better than I. How did you react to first her performance and then her resignation?
In some ways, this I'm saying in retrospect, on December 5th, Claudine Gay inadvertently became the best advocate for the Jewish community at Harvard.
How so?
Because we, or at least I had been saying for months that Jewish students are often treated categorically different than other minority groups. And the reaction from the university, and certainly the reaction from the outside community, was, you're overtly sensitive, you're exaggerating, it can't be that bad. And then all of a sudden you have the president of Harvard University on live TV, under oath, in front of Congress, saying you actually could call for the genocide of Jewish people depending on the context. And I remember hearing that on live TV, pointing at the TV and saying, aha, I told you. This is something that I'd been trying for months for people to realize, and she said it herself. I'll also say something, little behind the scenes. But when Congresswoman Elise Stefanik asked that question, did the calls for genocide against Jewish people violate Harvard's code of conduct? That was not meant to be a trick question. That was not meant to be the kicker. The kicker was going to be the follow-up, which was, okay, if it obviously does, then why have you allowed it on your campus? But these presidents, Liz McGill, Sally Kornbluh, Claudine Gay, they couldn't get out of their own way. And when they said it depends on the context, Stefanik even says, this is a softball question, I'll give you another chance. So it was incredibly validating, actually, what she said, because it showed that what we were going through was real, and Harvard does treat Jews differently than every other minority group.
Claudine Gay resigned. Has anything changed as a result of her resignation?
Not only has nothing changed, but I would actually argue things probably got worse. And it's also critical to mention that after her December 5th congressional testimony, the Harvard Corporation, essentially the Board of Trustees, they vote unanimously in support of her, saying that she is the best person for the job. Why was she eventually fired, or in her words, resigned? It had nothing to do with anti-Semitism. It had nothing to do with the more than $1 billion in donations that were rescinded. It had to do with she plagiarized. Of the very, very few scholarly journals she published, 7 out of the 11 were blatantly plagiarized and stolen. If I did a tenth of what she did at Harvard, I would have been expelled that day. So it's important to realize that there has been no personal responsibility, no ownership of what happened. Penny Pritzker, who's the head of the corporation, she's now in charge of selecting the new president. But the new president is a man by the name of Alan Garber. He was the provost for a number of years. Under his watch, there was a 3-week encampment that followed Jews like me on our way to class. They drew him actually as a devil with horns, calling him Alan Garbage. He allowed anti-Semitic professors to publish an anti-Semitic cartoon and then did not discipline them in any way, shape, or form. There was a staff member who taunted me with a machete and challenged me to debate him as to whether Jews were behind 9/11. This all happened under Alan Garber's watch, and he did nothing about it. To this day, he has never responded to any of my emails. He's never agreed to meet with me. Lawsuit or not, he's a feckless leader who does not care about the plight of Jewish students. And I can say that as a matter of fact, because if he cared, he would have implemented policies, and he just didn't. And let me just add one more point. Why did the encampment at Harvard end? Because Alan Garber gave them exactly what they wanted. In exchange for packing up their tents, the students will be able to meet with the Harvard Management Corporation to discuss divesting Harvard's $50 billion endowment from Israel. They will be able to meet with senior faculty to talk about a Palestinian studies department. Of the hundreds of students and professors who took part in the encampments. Only 13 were suspended, and as of 2 weeks ago, 13 of the 13 had their suspensions revoked. That's all thanks to Alan Garber.
So Shabbos, I'm sure many JBS viewers are wondering again and again and again, much as they hear these stories, what went wrong in the American higher education system? I mean, at the end of the day, this is not about an individual. It's not about Claudine Gay alone or about Alan Garber alone. There's something much deeper that's been going on, presumably before our eyes. What is it, and what did so many people miss?
Sure. So I think number one, we have to look at the data and look at the numbers. At its peak, Harvard was 25% Jewish. Now it's 4% Jewish. As a percentage, there were more Jews at Harvard University under the official quota system than there are today. It's not because Jews got dumber over time, it's because there has been a deliberate and systemic campaign to get rid of as many Jewish American students as possible. I do think, and this is someone who is progressive, or at least was once progressive, I do think the stereotypes and the activists are kind of right when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI initiatives. They have really fostered a system or an ideology where all peoples can be categorized into two classes, the oppressor and the oppressed. Jews have the misfortune of being mischaracterized as white, and therefore, as I mentioned, whether it was 40,000 babies beheaded, it doesn't matter because it all falls through that rubric. You know, Harvard Chabad published the, I don't know what to call it, the 45-minute Hamas propaganda video. They wanted students and professors to see it in real time. And Claudine Gay does not come, of course. But of the roughly 300-400 students and professors who do go to watch this film, myself included, almost all of them were people like me, Jewish people, people who don't actually need to see it. And I think it really falls back to systemic problems of higher education where we are so focused on race and ethnicity and external identities that we've sort of lost the plot. There is zero emphasis on intellectual diversity. And in fact, 97% of the Harvard faculty identify as liberal.
This is the Harvard Crimson study?
This is the Harvard Crimson
study. That's done each year?
Exactly.
And was it 1% self-identified as conservative?
Yep. I mean, that is a problem. That is really, really bad, especially at an institution of higher learning, especially at an institution of higher learning that is the oldest and most revered in this country, that you have almost no faculty who are exploring alternative viewpoints. So when you are a student and you've gone through the Harvard educational system for 4 years and almost exclusively are taught by professors who subscribe to one ideology, of course it goes without saying that you are now going to have an anti-Israel, anti-Western, anti-American worldview. And this is not true just of Harvard, it's true of the Ivy Leagues and of institutions of higher learning across the board. We have favored racial and ethnic diversity instead of intellectual diversity. It's a tremendous issue.
And when you speak about the faculty across the board, you're also talking about Jewish faculty as well, because sometimes people point to Jewish students and faculty who are targeted or beleaguered on campus. I'm not so sure that the Jewish faculty always falls so neatly into that category. How does it play out at Harvard?
Correct. So let's focus on Harvard Divinity School, which is where I really spent most of my time. I can think, I'm not going to mention names,
no, please don't.
But I can think of only one faculty member, really two if you count the one who was a visiting professor, but one faculty member who has been staunchly in support externally and publicly of Jewish students, who's signed on to letter campaigns saying that the treatment of Jewish students is abhorrent. Someone who believes in the strong state of Israel and its security and its vitality. I can really only think of one.
There are many Jewish faculty members at
Correct.
Harvard, presumably.
And look, the uncomfortable truth is that there were many Jewish students who took part in the encampments.
I was going to come to that next.
There were many Jewish students who called for an intifada. And in fact, there was an article written against me. It was really a hit piece in the forward. And it was by a student who said, I'm a Jewish student at Harvard Divinity School, and Shabbos Kestenbaum, doesn't speak for me. Leaving aside the fact that I never once tried speaking for him. But of course I don't speak for him, because he, along with many Jewish students at Harvard Divinity School, actively took part, as I said, in calls for an intifada, free Palestine from the river to the sea. What we're doing is not anti-Semitic because we're Jewish. I mean, that's a problem, and it's a problem for the Jewish community to contend with, that there's a significant amount of young Jewish Americans who forget about they don't identify with the state of Israel. They're disconnected from their religious attachments to the land, but they are deeply, deeply anti-Zionist and provide a almost moral legitimacy or validation for blatant anti-Semitism. The encampments were blatantly anti-Semitic, regardless of how many Jews were involved or not.
And since some claim from the encampments, no, this is only about a state, Israel, this has nothing to do with Jews, you say it was blatantly anti-Semitic. How would you support that statement?
Sure. Well, number one, everyone, your listeners should follow me on social media. I post videos of this. Every time I walk through the encampment, I, of course, always wear my kippah. Every single time for 3 weeks, I was followed. There were individuals, some Jewish, mostly non-Jewish, with yellow safety vests, self-appointed security safety marshals who took it upon themselves to monitor the encampment, and they would, with their phones, record me. They would follow me on the way to class. They would write down my movements, and it wasn't just me. There were dozens of Jewish students, dozens of Jewish faculty member or affiliates who reported the exact same thing. And when you call for the globalization of the Intifada was the worst period of violence against the Jewish people in the 21st century. The indiscriminate blowing up of hospitals and nightclubs, that's what the Intifada is. And in fact, the leaders of the encampment, they called us racist. They said, you're racist because you're simply scared of Arabic, because you think that's what an intifada is. But to us, an intifada is something else. And there is no other minority group in the world that is not allowed to define what is dangerous, harmful, or offensive to them. I would never in a million years dare to tell an African-American student or an African-American friend of mine what is or isn't racist. But every leader of the encampment have took it upon themselves to tell Jewish people what is or isn't anti-Semitic. I mean, what hypocrisy, what stupidity, and yes, when you call for an intifada, when you follow Jews on their way to class, when you paint our Jewish president with horns and a tail, that is unquestionably anti-Semitic.
So you spoke about the Jewish students that were on the other side in the encampments. What about other Jewish students? I mean, were there Jewish students who woke up on October 7th or thereafter and who joined with you? And what about non-Jewish students? Is it fair to assume that all non-Jewish students were either against you or silent? Or were there some who understood that this was, yes, about Israel, but it was something bigger as well?
Sure, I can speak anecdotally and more about my personal experiences. While it's true everyone knows about the 34 student groups, on the night of October 7th in the Harvard Divinity School WhatsApp group, which I'm a part of, a student posted a picture of a rally that they were organizing. This is the night of October 7th, called Long Live the Palestinian Resistance, Victory is Ours. And the response from my classmates, from the people who I thought were my friends, was as if he was planning a picnic in the park. Is this open to community members? I'd love to join. People were reacting with heart emojis. It's very difficult to forgive and certainly very difficult to forget that experience. Were there individuals non-Jewish individuals who supported the Jewish community? Absolutely. Were they as loud and vocal as I would have liked them to be, or were they as loud as vocal as they were during Black Lives Matter, during the reversal of Roe v. Wade, during the attacks on the LGBTQ plus community? No, they really weren't. And when it comes to the Jewish community, and this is where I get in trouble because people assume that I'm the self-declared spokesman for the Jewish community. I certainly am not, and I encourage people to get to know the Jewish students at Harvard. There aren't that many of us, unfortunately. But the reaction has...
Again, you said 4% today?
Correct.
Of the undergraduate
Correct.
Student population at Harvard?
Correct.
Whereas you said earlier, 25% at its peak?
Correct. So Harvard Chabad has been a staunch they have been the voice, I would say, for Jewish students since day one. When, I think her name was Maria Ressa, the Harvard commencement speaker, when she got up at commencement in front of 30,000 people and said, I was called anti-Semitic by power and money because they want power and money, dipping into anti-Semitic tropes at the beginning of her speech. There was only one person who stood up and left, and that was Rabbi Hershey Zarchi of Harvard Chabad. So Chabad has been absolutely fantastic every step of the way. Hillel is more complicated. Number one, in all fairness, they did not have an executive director this past year, which if you're a Jewish organization on campus, this was a bad year to not have an executive director. I will say Rabbi Rubenstein is their incoming director. I've had phone calls with him. I haven't met him in person yet, but he seems like a terrific candidate. He seems like he's very invested in solving this problem. But the Hillel, I believe, could have done more. The student president released, unclear if it was on his own volition or if he was using the backing of the Hillel, unclear, but he released his own statement saying that the Jewish students at the encampment have a place at the Hillel, and that was, I felt, deeply misguided. I don't think any student who follows Jews on their way to class ever has a place in any institution, but that was pretty bad, I would say. But there are many Jewish students who don't like what I'm doing. They think I'm exaggerating. They think I'm painting Harvard or their experience in an unfair light. And there are many Jewish students who are incredibly supportive of what I'm doing, albeit they do it silently. Not too many people who are as vocal as I would like, but the reaction is mixed.
And would you say the reaction was equally mixed to Bill Ackman and those on the outside who tried to exert their own influence?
So in my opinion, Bill Ackman is absolutely correct. He is really leading this charge. I am eternally grateful for people like him, people like Ken Griffin, people like the Ophairs from Harvard Kennedy School, who are holding back significant amounts of donations. I think that is an excellent idea, and that is really the only way that Harvard will change. But this is
even if countries like Qatar may step in directly or indirectly and fill the coffers?
I'll put it this way. Qatar, Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, they're already giving hundreds of millions of dollars annually to Harvard. Jewish students should not be held hostage to the whims of anti-democratic, anti-Western, and anti-Semitic countries. Harvard should just do the right thing and not accept those monies. But obviously they're either unable or unwilling to do that. But that doesn't mean we should change our behavior or our policies. We should not dictate or be dictated by what Harvard does. I think we should do the right thing. And the right thing is to not give an institution a single dollar so long as they violate federal law, so long as they create a double standard for Jewish students, and so long as they permeate and celebrate a culture of anti-Semitism. And I can give you, I'll just close this answer with this. I give long answers, sorry. I'll just say that at Harvard, in the last 10 months, a Jewish student was spat on for wearing a kippah. An Israeli student was asked to leave the class because her nationality made others uncomfortable. An Israeli student at the business school was physically accosted. I had a staff member taunt me with a machete. I had to have private armed security outside my house. So I get that there are many Jewish students who don't like what I'm doing, who think I'm creating a undue pressure or tension on them. But this is the reality. I'm not exaggerating. With the things I'm saying all objectively happened. And don't take my word for it. The Harvard Jewish Alumni Alliance, the House Committee on Education and the Workforce, they all separately detailed their own reports. And they found that there is a culture of anti-Semitism that permeates Harvard University.
And can we trust today any internal review of those anti-Semitic accusations by Harvard itself? Or does it have to come from the outside?
It has to come from the outside. I mean, I remember...
So you have a lawsuit?
Yeah, we have a lawsuit. Speaking of.
And what's happening with the lawsuit?
So thank God, we're going to trial. Going to trial, baby. So we are the first case.
Of all the universities, that are being now sued.
This is the first to go to trial. This is the first in American history that is suing a university on grounds of anti-Semitism pertaining to violations of Title VI that is going to trial. So we are incredibly aware of the weight of responsibility and the importance that this has, not just for me and the 5 other anonymous plaintiffs, but for the American Jewish community. We all remember reading the Atlantic article, is the golden age of American Jewry over? And I think this lawsuit is a testament to the fact that not without a fight. And that's what this lawsuit is. And we will hold Harvard accountable in all spaces, in all avenues that we can, including the court of law. And we know that we will be successful because the facts speak for themselves.
And the trial is slated to begin?
We don't know yet. That's all being worked out now.
Would it be in the fall? Or
unclear.
It's still unclear.
I'll put it this way. I don't want to speculate, and I certainly don't want my lawyers to get angry with me. But I think they already are, but whatever. Every time we filed our lawsuit in mid-January, then we filed an amended complaint to really talk about all the anti-Semitism that happened since we filed. every single time, Harvard's response was to file a motion to dismiss with prejudice, meaning that not only would a judge toss out our lawsuit, but make it impossible for any Jewish student to hold Harvard accountable for anti-Semitism in the court of law. They have shown, forget about zero willingness, they have shown an inability to recognize that they have fostered a culture of anti-Semitism on their campus. And in fact, when the judge said 2-3 weeks ago that we were going to trial, Harvard puts out a awful statement. I mean, talk about gaslighting, saying that, we are confident that the facts will speak for themselves and, the judge will recognize our merits or whatever. I mean, no apology, no willingness to change. I can't explain it.
And the Board of Trustees, or the Harvard Corporation as it's called, again, supportive of the institution, no breaking of the ranks there.
Protect the institution at all costs.
At all costs.
Penny Pritzker is the head of the snake here. How she has been able to evade resignation or firing is simply unbelievable, because she was the one who selected Claudine Gay. She's the one who stood by Claudine Gay. She's the one who would tell donors not to rescind. She's the one who refuses to meet with Jewish students. She's the one who refuses to create or implement or enforce policies. And the fact that she is still there and she will be the one spearheading the search for the new president tells you all you need to know about Harvard's values.
We only have a couple minutes left, and I have 2 more questions that I'd love to get in. Number one, what was the experience like speaking from the podium of the Republican National Convention? What kind of response did you get, both in the hall and then in the hallways?
Yeah. If you would have told me even 6 months ago that I'd be speaking at the Republican convention, I would have said, yeah, as a protester, someone who was able to smuggle himself in.
Again, reminding the audience that you are a registered Democrat.
I've only voted for Democrats in the past.
But you accepted because?
I accepted because if there is going to be a platform that can amplify the voices of students, I will accept it. And I said the very next day after my speech, I said on Fox, ironically, I said if the Democrats want me to speak, I would do it in a heartbeat. I would pay for my own ticket, I would do it, because this needs to be a bipartisan issue.
But the fact that you're here in the studio the same week the Democrats are meeting in Chicago suggests they did not.
They did not. I actually will be going to the DNC tomorrow, but not as a speaker, not in any official role, just as someone who wants to show that the Democratic Party, you seem to be abandoning us, and I want you to return to your roots.
And how do you expect to convey that?
Well, I have relationships with lawmakers. I have relationships with, I don't want to get into the specifics, but relationships with those in the Jewish democratic spaces. And I want to help. I want to be an ally. I'm not here to smash and to yell and to call everything anti-Semitic. I want them to realize that as it stands, Donald Trump is on track to receive the most Jewish votes since Dwight Eisenhower. And that is a direct result of the Democratic Party's kowtowing and enabling of so much of the anti-Semitic protesters. I mean, we saw it last night. President Biden, in his it wasn't a primetime address, it was close to midnight, but in his address he says that, those protesting on the street have a point. Yeah. Those with signs literally saying we stand with Hamas, waving Hezbollah flag, they have a point? That's inexcusable. And I get that these policymakers and NGOs, they have allegiances to the Democratic Party, but they have to recognize they are bleeding the Jewish vote. And if they want to reverse that, if they want to make sure that Donald Trump is not the next president, they would do everything in their power to platform, I don't mean me, but people like me, those saying, hey, we've only voted for Democrats, but we're not so sure we could keep doing it. Don't take us for granted. And I think that the fact that they're not, again, I don't want to make this about me, I don't want to sound arrogant, but the fact that they're not inviting me, or that they're not inviting any Jewish student speaker, to speak, I think is pretty problematic.
And I hate to cut it short, but I've got to get this last question in.
Yeah. Sorry, I give very long answers. I
apologize. No, and they're very much appreciated. But let's go back. You're a graduate of a wonderful Jewish day school, SAR, in New York City. If you're invited back to give guidance counseling to incoming seniors at SAR, should they apply to Harvard?
I'll put it this way. I'm very appreciative of Rabbi Harkstark, Rabbi Kroll, the principals of SAR. I'm very appreciative of the education I received. I cannot understand, and this is not just true of SAR, this is really true of a lot of yeshiva day schools, and this is probably why I haven't been invited so often to speak there. On the one hand, they will say, we are so proud of our graduates who are defending the Jewish people at Harvard, at Columbia, at MIT. And then in the same breath, they will say Mazal Tov to our 12th graders who are going to Harvard, Columbia, and MIT. I cannot for the life of me understand why there is such cognitive dissonance of why you are enabling and feeding a system that you yourself have admitted is hurting and harming Jewish students. So I remember one of the very first times I went on Fox, I said, if you're a day school principal, and TABC actually already did this, if you're a day school principal, you should have Harvard and Columbia recruit at your school, but only if they first clearly articulate the policies that they will implement or the policies they will enforce to protect your current students next year.
Yeah.
And we haven't seen that many high schools take what I would say that obvious step, and that's really frustrating.
And there was a story, I think in the New York Post the other day, that for the first time in many years at Ramaz, which is another great modern Orthodox Jewish day school, no students are going to Columbia University.
And I do think that's...
We're going to have to wrap it up.
Okay. It's a good idea. It's a good idea.
I apologize for that, but JBS viewers, the good news is that our future includes people like Shabbos Kestenbaum, who will help lead the Jewish people, stand up with pride for us, for the Jewish people, for the state of Israel, for the relationship between Israel and the United States. Shabbos, thank you very much.
Thank you.
JBS viewers, this is David Harris, defending Israel, and looking forward to seeing you again next week.